Have you seen the massive global headlines lately? I mean, everyone is talking about Japan practically forcing Apple to open up its notoriously closed iOS ecosystem. The tech world is absolutely buzzing right now. But the big question, the one on literally every developer's mind, is this. Does this actually mean the dreaded 30% App Store tax is finally dead in Japan?
Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're doing a complete, deep dive analysis into this massive regulatory shift happening over in Japan. We're going to look right past the flashy headlines and uncover what this actually means on a practical, day-to-day level for indie developers and digital businesses. We're calling this whole situation the illusion of freedom, and you'll see exactly why in just a second.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the illusion of freedom, examine Apple's new price tag, explore the cost of friction, jump into a practical indie survival guide, and finally, reveal where the real money is in winning the layer game.
All right, Section 1. The illusion of freedom, regulatory shifts versus reality.
So, Japan has essentially become the second major experimental ground for iPhone openness, right? On the heels of the European Union. But simply opening up a closed ecosystem legally, that definitely doesn't mean it becomes free to operate in realistically. If we track Japan's Mobile Software Competition Act, or MSCA, it was enacted in June 2024, with full enforcement hitting in December 2025. Now, pay attention to that middle point. In April 2025, the EU handed Apple a massive €500 million fine for anti-steering violations. That is a crucial precedent. Why? Because unlike the EU's pretty heavy-handed fines, Japan historically prefers a much softer, dialogue-based approach. The actual changes to the ecosystem might unfold very differently simply because Japan's regulatory culture relies heavily on continuous negotiation rather than immediate aggressive penalties.
Which brings us to Section 2, Apple's new price tag, the new fees.
Looking closely at Apple's response to the regulations, it's pretty clear they didn't actually abolish their infamous toll booth. Nope. Instead, they took that single toll booth and engineered a highly complex network of smaller ones. So the burning question every tech entrepreneur and developer is trying to figure out right now is simply this: how much do you actually save in this supposedly open system?
Now, what's really interesting here is how brilliantly Apple has redesigned its multi-tiered fee structure to protect its revenue. Just listen to these numbers. If you stay in the App Store with Apple's in-app purchases, you pay 15 to 26%. Okay, what if you offer an alternative payment inside the app? Well, you still pay Apple 10 to 21%. What if you link out to a web shop? Apple takes 10 to 15%. And if you decide to go completely rogue to an alternative market outside the App Store, you face a 5% core technology commission. It's wild. Apple has mathematically ensured they retain a cut, no matter which path you choose.
And this brings us to the trap that a lot of indie developers miss, which is the total cost of ownership, or TCO. By definition, TCO includes all those hidden operational costs beyond just the platform fee. So while a 5% commission on an alternative market looks incredibly tiny on paper, your actual financial burden completely skyrockets. Why? Because you now have to pay for the payment processing, manage all the global tax compliance, handle the refund requests, and run the entire customer support infrastructure yourself. The fees might look lower at a glance, but the operational responsibility just shifted directly onto your shoulders.
Let's dive into Section 3, the cost of friction, Epic versus Alt Store.
Now that we understand the hidden financial fees, we really have to look at the real-world user friction of these alternative markets. Even outside the App Store, Apple maintains control through a mandatory security process called notarization, which basically ensures they are always the ultimate layer of trust. We can clearly see the real-world friction of this by comparing the Epic Game Store to Alt Store PAL. Getting a user to actually install an Epic game requires immense brand power to pull them through a terribly clunky flow. I'm talking visiting a website, downloading, diving into iOS settings to grant permissions, and navigating several scary warnings. Contrast that entirely with Alt Store PAL, which acts as a collective distributor. They offer ready-made infrastructure, user guides, and shared legal compliance. It's a stark contrast that illustrates a harsh reality. Opening an alternative store is really just about having the massive capital required to absorb high user friction. If you don't have Epic's billions, going it alone is practically impossible.
Moving on to Section 4, the Indie Survival Guide Strategic Playbook.
So what do we actually do with this reality? We're transitioning from regulatory analysis into highly practical applications to bypass all this friction. The crucial point here is figuring out what indie developers should actually build, instead of falling into the very expensive trap of trying to launch their own app store. Here are 4 actionable survival strategies. First, utilize web links specifically for high-ticket or recurring sales, where saving that extra percentage really impacts your bottom line. Second, implement alternative payments inside your app if your main goal is to own the customer data directly. Third, and I can't emphasize this enough, build a community CRM, like a Discord or an email list, so you have direct access to your users outside of Apple's walled garden. And fourth, if you do want alternative distribution, join established alternative markets instead of trying to build your own from scratch.
A realistic hybrid model for developers today looks a bit like this. You don't abandon Apple entirely. No. Instead, you treat the App Store purely as a discovery channel. Let's say 50% of your effort goes there to find users, simply because that's where the traffic is. But then you drive your actual revenue through your web shop, making up 30%, and drive long-term retention through your community CRM engagement, making up the remaining 20%. You essentially separate where users find you from where users actually pay you.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Winning the Layer Game, the True Opportunity.
Now, this is absolutely the most lucrative insight for digital business builders tuning in today. The true opportunity in Japan's new open ecosystem isn't in making an app store. It's actually in building the operational layers that make all this new complexity manageable. Let's map out these specific medium-term opportunities step by step. Step 1. Build web shop templates for small apps. Indies need easy plug-and-play ways to handle external payments without hiring a massive engineering team. Step 2. Create compliance tools. Think about all the new MSCA and European DMA rules. Developers desperately need software to automate legal notices, parent consent, and installation guides. And Step 3. Launch lightweight mini-markets. Not massive app store rivals, but small hubs for cross-promotion. Ultimately, the winner in this new market will simply be whoever removes the complexity of compliance, payments, and customer support for the cheapest price.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core contrarian thesis of our explainer today. As Ms. Kim Insights notes, Apple's opening is not a concession, but a rewriting of the price tag. The real winner isn't the one who builds an app store, but the one who builds the compliance and payment layers. I mean, that hits the nail right on the head. The smart money isn't fighting the massive platform. It's providing the tools and the shovels to developers who are just trying to navigate this incredibly complex new terrain.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to really ponder as we wrap up today. As you look at your own business strategy moving forward, ask yourself, are you building an app or are you building a relationship? Because honestly, when the dust finally settles on all these platform monopoly changes, the only true assets that will survive the regulatory chaos are the direct community connections and the direct relationships you own yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the numbers and the strategy. Keep building those direct connections, stay focused, and keep learning.